your practice does trauma-informed care training. I truly believe that leaders, not only just regular old leaders, but HR professionals,
Agreed.
training.
Agreed.
I mean,
Agreed.
it is so essential to have that kind of training to be prepared for these types of things and to have these kinds of conversations. And I think that that really, again, when you talk about what should a manager do, I think that they should proactively prepare themselves and have that type of training.
I love that suggestion, Joyel, because I think, there's lots of, how to have difficult conversations trainings. But I think to your point, being really specific and finding training, how to have difficult emotional conversations. So not just about feedback, not just about performance review, but what to do when tragedy strikes.
Yes.
Those conversations, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's tragedy, like with an individual, somebody's family member dies. Sometimes it's community tragedy, right? There's been murders that have been local or, bigger impact.
Yes.
And so like, how do you,
seeing a rise in workplace violence.
Right. And so how do you address it? Because what often happens, and I understand why, what often happens is people don't say anything. Managers don't say anything. And I understand their own getting frozen and not knowing what to say, not wanting to hurt somebody, not feeling like they're qualified, waiting for their boss to say something instead. So I understand all of those very human reasons. And then it leaves employees feeling uncared for.
Yes.
And what ends up happening is in that moment, but beyond, months, years beyond, people remember, right? Maya Angelou says people won't remember what you said, but you'll remember how they felt.
Yes.
And that is how they start to disconnect and detach and become not as great of an employee. I mean, I remember, and I've talked about this before, when my cousin died, and it was unexpected. She was like 24, very young. And I found out at work, and the way I was treated was, the first thing that I was told was, you don't get bereavement leave for that. This happened 20 plus years ago. I still remember it. I still remember what that moment felt like.
Yes.
It very quickly changed my impression of somebody who I had thought of very differently.
Yes.
And so preparation for managers to be able to navigate this differently, I think, is really, really key.
Yeah. And I think, not to make an excuse for how poorly that manager responded, people don't know what to say.
Exactly.
But if you're prepared, if you have the training to deal with these types of things, then you'll be better equipped to not leave a 20+ year impression on somebody who respected you. I mean, it's so interesting. Management and leadership is such a precarious tightrope. You can, it takes years to build trust and seconds to break it. True. And if you have some tools in your toolkit to be the best, or as best as you can be in that moment, leader, in times of crisis, I think that's something worth saying. You never learn everything as a leader. You're always learning more. So, considering that as a professional development goal is to, as much as you can, to be the best leader you can be.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I agree. And to be able to, acknowledge your mistakes. I mean, it would have been one thing if somebody, if she came back and said, that was awful.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Go home. What do you need? I would like, it would have been different if there was, because we are going to make mistakes.
Yes.
Right? So I do want to be clear. It's not like we're not going to, we're going to step in it. We're going to make mistakes. And then we can also apologize and acknowledge it and, attempt to repair what was broken so we can recover from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know what? I'm curious if you have thoughts. We're talking about the manager's perspective. We're talking about the person who lost somebody, but then I'm also thinking about the team. And I think I want to add one more component that I realized. Sometimes the grief hits because someone at work's family member dies.
Yes.
Sometimes the grief hits because somebody at work dies.
Yes.
And then the impact that has on the team that you're still charged with leading. And so I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts about ways that managers can acknowledge and what has happened and support.
I see a lot of different things, right? Like I've seen, managers reach out to the employee assistance program, for example, and they're like, can we have you come in and talk about grief? And so there's a third party entity to kind of facilitate a conversation. And I think that helps, but usually I feel that, as a recipient of that kind of engagement, there's a lot of like, here we go, rolling out the extra person. I think there could be a lot of power and impact in just having a manager gather their employees voluntarily, if you'd like to come, and let us just have, a remembrance, like a memorial almost. Let's talk about Jane and, and what we missed or liked about them or what have you. Or if you're not comfortable with that, let's all meet at the memorial service if you choose to. I think there's something about it, like where the funeral arrangements are announced, and it's almost like expected that everyone go, like it's part of your job. And I think the piece of the grieving as a team needs to be stressed that it's voluntary. Let's remember this person, this coworker, the way that you feel comfortable. If you don't feel, no judgment. It should be a judgment zone. And I think that needs to be a communication that needs to be shared with the team.
I think that is so important. The idea of it being voluntary for all the reasons you said. And I think I want to talk a little bit to the reality of no judgment. And I think emotional intelligence. So what I'm thinking is, I actually remember years ago, within our team, there was a death, and not on the team, but somebody who was cared about by somebody on our team. And so we went, but not all of us went. And I had to very consciously check myself,
right,
and remind myself that death and funerals and services mean different things to different people. And I remember constantly having to remind myself of that, because I was like, we should all be here. Like, that was my initial thought.
Right.
And so I think I just want to be honest about what I was thinking and how I was feeling, and also how I had to work to, I was honest with myself about how I was feeling, but how I had to be really intentional and kind of work in my own brain and emotions to not put that onto somebody else. So I felt how I felt, right? But that to not communicate that, to not hold it against the other person. And I think the reason I was able to not do that was because I was honest with myself about how I felt about it. So I just want to bring in that piece. I completely agree that we should be respectful of how people handle death differently. And we should be able to catch ourselves when we are like, ooh, this is different than me. I wish they were doing it this way. And I cannot act on my judgment. Right. I do not want to judge this other person for doing it differently.